They say a master craftsman can hear a hairline crack in $1 million violin from across the room. But I missed the sound of my own marriage breaking until it shattered beyond repair. What I discovered that night in my workshop wasn't just my wife's betrayal. It was a masterclass in manipulation that would make Machiavelli blush. When she showed up 6 months later with a baby bump and tears in her eyes, I thought I'd seen her best performance. I was wrong. The real show was just beginning, and this time, the whole music world had front-row seats to watch a master instrument maker's life turn into a symphony of chaos. Here's the thing about perfect pitch. Once you have it, you can't unhear a false note. And boy, did my wife's story hit all the wrong chords. I've spent 20 years perfecting the art of crafting string instruments, learning to detect the slightest imperfection in sound or form. Yet somehow, I missed the warning signs in my own marriage until it was too late. I'm Nathan, a luthier based in Boston. For those unfamiliar with the term, I craft and restore high-end violins and cellos. My workshop has become pretty well known in classical music circles, and I've been lucky enough to work with some of the best musicians in the world. I met Sarah at a symphony performance where I was delivering a restored Stradivarius to the first-chair violinist. She was working as an administrator at the Morrison Dance Academy, and we clicked instantly over our shared love of the arts. Our first 5 years of marriage were like a perfect symphony, each of us playing our part in harmony. I expanded my business, opening workshops in New York and Philadelphia, while Sarah climbed the ranks at the academy. The travel was tough. I'd be gone for weeks sometimes, sourcing rare wood or working with musicians in different cities. But I always thought we were solid. Sarah understood my passion, or at least I believe she did. The thing about working with fine instruments is that every piece of wood has its own unique character. Each violin tells its own story through its grain patterns and resonance. Over the years, I've learned to read these stories, to understand what makes each instrument special. My latest project was particularly exciting, restoring a 200-year-old Guarneri violin that had been discovered in an estate sale. The work required me to travel frequently between Boston and Philadelphia, where I had contacts who specialized in sourcing period-appropriate materials. My friend Michael, a cellist I've known for years, once told me that every instrument has its breaking point, a moment when the tension becomes too much and something has to give. I just never thought my marriage would reach that point. Looking back, maybe I should have seen it coming. The late-night texts she'd quickly hide when I walked in, the sudden work events that kept her at the academy until midnight, the way she stopped asking about my trips or showing interest in my work. When you're caught up in the rhythm of life, working towards what you think is a shared dream, it's easy to miss the discord creeping in. I was focused on growing my reputation, expanding to Chicago next, making sure we had a secure future. I had just signed a lease on a new workshop space there, and was in talks with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra about becoming their primary instrument restorer. I thought I was composing a masterpiece of a life for us. Instead, I was about to discover that while I was fine-tuning other people's instruments, my own marriage had gone completely out of tune. Little did I know that a random Tuesday afternoon would change everything. Sometimes the most dramatic changes in life come without warning, like a string snapping in the middle of a perfect performance. The irony wasn't lost on me. I could spot a hairline crack in a violin's finish from across the room, but I couldn't see the growing fissures in my own marriage until they were about to shatter everything. That Tuesday started like any other day in my workshop. I was working on the Guarneri, carefully removing decades of built-up varnish to reveal the beautiful maple underneath. The restoration was going well. Each layer I removed showed promising signs of the instrument's original glory. I had planned to stay in Philadelphia for another week, but something told me to head back to Boston early. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe fate has a twisted sense of humor. I called Robert, my assistant in the Boston workshop, to let him know I was coming back. His response caught me off guard. "Oh, that's great, Nathan, but you might want to call ahead. I saw Sarah at lunch yesterday with some guy at Lardist. They seemed pretty close." There was an awkward pause. I didn't know if I should say anything, but my hand stopped moving over the violin's surface. Lardist was our special place, the restaurant where we had our first date, where I proposed, where we celebrated our anniversaries. "What do you mean, close?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "They were holding hands across the table," Robert said quietly. And when they left, he had his arm around her waist. "I'm sorry, Nathan. I know this isn't my business, but, well, she's been coming to the workshop looking for you when you're away, always dressed up, always checking her phone." Something felt off. I thanked Robert and hung up. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the partially restored Guarneri. Like this violin, every marriage has its own unique imperfections, small scratches and dents that add character. But this felt like finding a crack running straight through the soundboard, threatening the very integrity of the instrument. I packed my tools methodically, each movement precise and controlled, just as I'd been taught all those years ago. A luthier's hands must never shake, no matter what. I drove back to Boston in silence. No music, no calls, just the hum of the engine and the rhythm of my thoughts. When I arrived home, the house was quiet. Sarah's car wasn't in the driveway, but something else caught my eye. A sleek black BMW parked across the street that I'd never seen before. As I walked up to our front door, I could hear music playing faintly from inside. Not classical or contemporary dance music that Sarah usually played, but smooth jazz. I stood there, key in hand, wondering if this was the moment everything would change. In my work, I'd learned that sometimes the most valuable instruments are the ones that have been through the most trauma, restored, rebuilt, reborn. But as I turned that key, I wondered if the same could be said for marriages. What I saw when I opened that door would change everything. Sometimes, like a perfect piece of tone wood, life splits exactly along its grain. The scene in our living room hit me like a wrong note in a perfect symphony. Sarah was there with him, sitting close on our couch. The same couch where I'd spent countless evenings sketching designs for custom violins while she graded dance students' evaluations. They jumped apart when I opened the door, but not fast enough. He was younger than I expected, probably one of the dance instructors from the academy. Sarah's face went through a rapid sequence of expressions: surprise, fear, and then an attempt at casual normalcy that fell as flat as an out-of-tune string. "Nathan, you're home early." Her voice was too high, too bright. The man stood up, smoothing his shirt. "This is David. He's a new choreographer at the academy. We were just discussing the upcoming recital schedule." I set my tool case down slowly, deliberately, the way I place my tools after a delicate repair. "Your phone, Sarah." My voice was quiet, controlled, like when I'm explaining hairline cracks to concerned musicians. "What?" She forced a laugh, but I could hear the tension in it, like a string wound too tight. "Show me your phone." I stayed by the door, watching them both. David looked between us, clearly uncertain whether to stay or go. "Nathan, don't be ridiculous. David and I were just—" "The phone, Sarah." "Now." I've learned in my work that sometimes the smallest imperfections reveal the biggest problems. A tiny crack can render a priceless instrument worthless. Now, watching her clutch her phone tighter, I knew I was about to discover just how deep this particular crack went. "This is absurd," she said, but her hands were shaking. "David, maybe you should go." He didn't need to be told twice. Grabbing his jacket and slipping past me with a mumbled goodbye, the door closed behind him, leaving us in a silence as heavy as the old-growth maple I use for my finest instruments. "I trust you," I said, the words tasting bitter. "I've always trusted you, so this should be simple. Show me your phone, and I'll apologize for overreacting." She stood there, phone clutched to her chest like a shield. "You're gone for weeks at a time, Nathan. Working on your precious instruments, chasing your dreams." "What about my dreams? What about the phone?" When she finally unlocked it and handed it to me, her hands were trembling. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Hundreds of messages, photos, videos. A whole secret symphony of betrayal, playing right under my nose while I was working to build our future. I've always believed that true craftsmanship requires absolute focus and emotional control. When you're restoring a priceless instrument, your hands can't shake, your judgment can't be clouded. As I stood there, staring at the evidence of Sarah's betrayal, I applied that same discipline to my next actions. "Nathan, please, let me explain." Sarah was crying now, her words coming out between sobs. "It's not what you think. David and it just happened. I was lonely. You were always gone." I didn't respond. Instead, I methodically forwarded the relevant messages and photos to my email, documenting everything like I would document the restoration process of a valuable violin. Each step precise, calculated, necessary. Say something, she pleaded. Yell at me. Be angry, just react. But I didn't. In my workshop, when I discover severe damage in an instrument, I don't react emotionally. I assess, plan, and act. That's exactly what I did now. I handed her phone back and walked to our bedroom. From the closet, I pulled out the emergency bag I always kept packed for sudden business trips. What are you doing? Sarah followed me, her voice rising with panic. We need to talk about this. You can't just leave. I added my essential documents, passport, bank statements, the folder with information about my workshops. My movements were as deliberate as when I'm packing my most delicate tools. Nathan, please. I'll end it with David. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. I'll quit my job at the academy if that's what you want. I paused at my workbench in the spare room, carefully collecting the small notebook where I kept my most valuable client contacts and restoration notes. Sarah stood in the doorway, mascara running down her face. Remember when you asked me once why I spend so much time examining an instrument before starting a restoration? My voice was steady, quiet. I told you it's because you need to understand the extent of the damage before you can decide if something can be saved. I zipped up my bag and turned to face her. I've seen enough damage here to know that some things can't be restored. You're walking away from 5 years of marriage just like that? Her voice cracked. Without even trying to fix it, I picked up my bag and tool case. No, Sarah. You walked away from our marriage every time you chose to be with him. I'm just finally acknowledging it's broken. With the same care I use when handling my most precious instruments, I took off my wedding ring and placed it on the workbench. A master craftsman knows when something is beyond repair. I'll have my lawyer contact you, I said, walking past her. Don't try to reach me. My steps down our front walkway were measured, calm. Behind me, I could hear Sarah calling my name, her voice breaking. But like a snapped violin string, some things can't be fixed. They can only be replaced. In my car, I took out my phone and blocked her number. Then I called Robert. I need to use the apartment above the Philadelphia workshop for a while. Of course, boss, he answered immediately. I'll have it ready by tonight. As I drove away from the house I'd shared with Sarah, I thought about the Guarneri waiting in my Philadelphia workshop. Like me, it was in the middle of a major restoration. Unlike my marriage, it could be saved. The next few weeks went by in a blur. I threw myself into work like a man possessed, channeling every ounce of emotion into the Guarneri restoration. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Barbara, was worth every penny as she handled the divorce proceedings. You're sitting pretty with the evidence, she told me. She doesn't have a leg to stand on. The apartment above my Philadelphia workshop became my sanctuary. It wasn't much, just a studio with basic furniture and a small kitchenette, but it was mine. No memories, no shared spaces, no ghost of what used to be. Just my tools, my workbench, and the steady rhythm of craftsmanship. Word travels fast in the music world, and soon enough, everyone knew the score. Most musicians took my side. After all, I was the guy who literally helped them make their music. Sarah tried reaching out through mutual friends, but I shut that down fast. As my dad used to say, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, and I might as well hang up my tools. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra deal came through. Talk about perfect timing. I threw myself into setting up the new workshop, hiring staff, establishing connections, working 60-hour weeks. Piece of cake when you're running from your thoughts. Robert stepped up big time, managing the Boston workshop like a champ. Boss, you should see the waiting list, he said during one of our calls. We're booked solid for the next 8 months. Guess people trust a craftsman who can spot a false note from a mile away. The Guarneri restoration became my therapy. Every layer of old varnish I stripped away felt like peeling off a layer of my old life. The instrument had been through hell, bad repairs, cheap replacements, years of neglect. But underneath all that damage was something genuine, something worth saving. Late one night, as I was working on the violin scroll, Michael stopped by. He took one look at me and said, "You're looking rough around the edges, buddy." I shrugged, not taking my eyes off the work. Better rough edges than a broken core. He grabbed a chair, straddling it backwards, a habit from his cello-playing days. "Sarah's been asking about you at the symphony." Says she made a huge mistake. Says she misses you. Yeah. I carefully applied some varnish. Funny how people miss things only after they break them. Michael watched me work in silence for a while. You know what's crazy? That violin you're restoring, it's actually going to be better than it was before. More valuable too. I finally looked up, because it's being restored the right way, not just patched up with quick fixes. Unlike some things, he said pointedly. I nodded, turning back to my work. Unlike some things. The truth was, I was changing too. Like the Guarneri, I was being stripped down to my core and rebuilt. The pain was still there, but it was different now. More like the satisfaction of muscles tired from good work than the sharp sting of betrayal. My phone buzzed with another blocked call, Sarah's third attempt that week. I ignored it, focusing instead on the warm glow of the maple under the fresh varnish. Some people might call me cold for cutting her off so completely, but hey, when a string is broken, you don't try to tie it back together. You replace it with a new one and move forward. Barbara called with updates about the divorce proceedings. Everything was moving along smoothly, no contest from Sarah's side. You're handling this like a pro, she said. Most clients are basket cases by this point. I almost laughed. If she only knew how many nights I'd spent working until dawn, how many times I caught myself reaching for my phone to share good news with someone who was no longer there. But that's the thing about being a craftsman. You learn to keep your hands steady, even when your world is shaking. The Guarneri was coming along beautifully. Soon it would sing again, its voice perhaps even richer for having been broken and restored. As for me, well, I was still a work in progress. 6 months into my new life in Chicago, things were finally falling into place. The workshop was thriving, the Guarneri was nearly finished, and I just signed a deal to restore instruments for another major orchestra. Life was looking up, as they say. It was close to midnight when the knock came. I was in my workshop, applying the final coat of varnish to the Guarneri's back. When I opened the door, the world seemed to skip a beat. Sarah stood there, but not the Sarah I remembered. She was wearing a loose-fitting dress that did nothing to hide her very pregnant belly. Holy cow, was all I could manage. Can I come in? Her voice was soft, uncertain. Please, Nathan. It's cold out here. I stepped aside mechanically. My mind was racing faster than a violinist's fingers during flight of the bumblebee. She walked past me into the workshop, one hand resting on her stomach. It's yours, Nathan, she said, reading my thoughts. I know what you're thinking, but this baby, our baby, was conceived before everything fell apart. I leaned against my workbench, trying to ground myself. The Guarneri sat there, its fresh varnish gleaming under the workshop lights. Like that violin, I thought I knew exactly where I was in the restoration process. Now this. I've changed, Sarah continued, tears forming in her eyes. What happened with David, it was the biggest mistake of my life. I was lost, confused, taking you for granted. But this baby, she placed both hands on her stomach. This is our second chance. We could be a family. A family, I repeated. And you waited 6 months to tell me? I was scared. I didn't know how to tell you after everything that happened. But I couldn't keep it from you anymore. Nathan, please look at me. I did. Really looked at her. The Sarah I'd married was still there, somewhere beneath the tears and the pregnancy glow. But so was the Sarah who'd betrayed me, who'd shared our most intimate moments with another man. We should get a paternity test, I said finally. The way her face changed, it was like watching a beautiful instrument hit the floor. What? How can you even suggest that? I know I hurt you, but I would never lie about this. Like you never lied about David? She recoiled as if I'd slapped her. That was different. This is our child. Then you won't mind proving it. My voice was steady, the same tone I use when explaining to a client why their beloved instrument needs major surgery. After she left, I stood there for a long time, staring at the Guarneri. Even the most perfectly restored instrument can never truly forget its breaks. The scars become part of its history, its character. But right then, I wasn't sure if that was a comfort or a curse. I should have known Sarah wouldn't take the paternity test suggestion lying down. 2 weeks after her midnight visit, I got served with papers at my workshop. She was suing me for abandonment and child support, claiming I was emotionally manipulating her by demanding a DNA test. This is actually good news, Barbara, my lawyer, said while reviewing the documents in my workshop. She paused to admire a violin I was restoring. She's playing right into our hands. No reasonable judge will object to a paternity test, especially given her documented infidelity. Plus, the timing of this pregnancy, it's suspicious at best. I was in the middle of working on a Stradivari copy when the news came. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was verifying the authenticity of an instrument, while fighting to verify the authenticity of my supposed child. Every craftsman knows that authenticity is everything in our world. A fake is a fake, no matter how beautiful it might appear. The Chicago Tribune picked up the story. Apparently, a master instrument maker being sued by his pregnant ex made for juicy headlines. Local craftsman in custody battle over unborn child. Talk about hitting a sour note. The article even included quotes from some of Sarah's dancer friends, painting me as the villain in this piece. Classic case of playing the victim while holding the bow that caused the damage. Sarah's lawyer tried to paint me as a cold, calculating perfectionist who was punishing his client for a momentary lapse in judgment. They even brought up my work, suggesting that my obsession with precision and control was a form of emotional abuse. Real rich, coming from someone who had turned cheating into an art form. Robert called from the Boston workshop. "Boss, you won't believe this. Sarah showed up here yesterday, all tears and drama, asking the staff to speak as character witnesses for her case. Talk about nerve. What did they say?" I asked, though I could guess. Told her to take a hike. "We all remember how she treated you. Besides, we're craftsmen. We can spot a fake when we see one." The hearing was set for next week. Barbara advised me to keep working, maintain my routine. "The more stable you appear, the better," she said, watching me adjust a violin's bridge with surgical precision. "Let her be the one having emotional outbursts in court. Keep being exactly what you are, methodical, precise, professional." Michael stopped by the workshop when he heard the news. "Man, she's really pulling out all the stops, huh?" He picked up a bow. "I just rest strong." "Yeah, well, when you're playing without sheet music, you make up your own tune," I replied, focusing on the violin in front of me. "The music community's behind you, buddy. Nobody likes a performer who plays false notes. The symphony board even called me. They want you to know this won't affect your contract with them." That evening, I received an email from Sarah. She'd attached an ultrasound photo with a message that read, "This is your son. How dare you question his parentage? You're breaking my heart all over again, like a damaged instrument. Some situations can't be fixed with guilt trips and emotional manipulation. They need proper legal restoration, guided by steady hands and clear eyes." The courthouse in downtown Chicago was as grand as any concert hall I'd worked in, with high ceilings and marble columns that made every footstep echo. Barbara and I arrived early, her briefcase full of evidence, my hands steady despite the tension in the air. Sarah was already there with her lawyer, her pregnancy now impossible to miss. She dressed carefully, a conservative maternity dress, minimal makeup, the perfect picture of a wronged, expectant mother. When she saw me, her eyes welled up with tears. Classic emotional concerto, first movement. "Remember," Barbara whispered, "let me handle the performance. You just need to stay composed." The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, didn't waste time on preliminaries. Sarah's lawyer went first, spinning a tale of a cold, perfectionist husband who abandoned his pregnant wife because of one mistake. He even brought up my violin restorations, suggesting my demand for a DNA test showed how I valued perfect instruments over human relationships. "Your Honor," he said, gesturing dramatically, "Mr. Walsh's obsession with authenticity has led him to question the most natural truth in the world, a mother's word about her child's paternity." Sarah took the stand next, giving an Oscar-worthy performance about our marriage, her momentary weakness, and how my dedication to my craft had left her feeling lonely and neglected. The waterworks were in full flow when she described how cruel it was for me to demand a DNA test. Then it was Barbara's turn. With the precision of a master tuner, she dismantled their emotional symphony piece by piece. She presented the evidence of Sarah's affair, not just the text messages and photos, but a timeline showing her relationship with David had lasted months, not the one mistake they claimed. "Your Honor," Barbara said calmly, "we have evidence that Mrs. Walsh's relationship with her dance instructor continued even after she claims to have ended it. The timing of this pregnancy coincides with both her relationship with my client and her affair. Then she played her masterstroke. Surveillance photos taken by a PI she'd hired, showing Sarah and David together just last week, entering his apartment building. So much for the remorseful wife act. Furthermore, Barbara continued, Mrs. Walsh's refusal to take a simple DNA test, while simultaneously demanding child support and attempting to shame my client publicly, suggests her claims might not be as reliable as she states. The judge listened to it all with an impassive face, occasionally making notes. When both sides had finished, she looked directly at Sarah. Mrs. Walsh, are you willing to submit to a paternity test? Sarah glanced at her lawyer, then back at the judge. Your Honor, I find it deeply hurtful that my husband would even question. That's not what I asked, the judge cut in sharply. A simple yes or no will suffice. The silence in the courtroom was as complete as the moment before a symphony's first note. Sarah's face crumpled. No, Your Honor. The judge nodded, as if confirming something she'd already suspected. Then I'm issuing a court order. No support payments will be mandated without a conclusive DNA test. Furthermore, I'm granting Mr. Walsh a protective order. Mrs. Walsh, you are to cease all contact with your ex-husband except through legal channels. Like a perfect final note, justice rang clear and true. Life is a funny way of coming full circle. 1 year after Sarah's midnight visit to my workshop, I was putting the finishing touches on the Guarneri, the same violin I'd been working on when my world first shattered. Its restoration had become a metaphor for my own journey. Strip away the damaged layers, rebuild from the foundation, emerge stronger. The Chicago workshop had flourished beyond my wildest dreams. We had a 6-month waiting list for restorations, and my reputation had only grown since the court case. Turns out, standing your ground earns respect in the music world. The way Michael put it, you stayed in tune when everyone expected you to crack. Barbara called with the final update. Sarah had moved back to Boston with David. Apparently, the baby was his after all. No big surprise there. She'd finally admitted it after he stepped up to take responsibility. The gossip in the music community died down faster than a pizzicato note. I threw myself into expanding the business, opening a new workshop in San Francisco. The West Coast symphony scene was booming, and they needed someone who understood the soul of their instruments. Robert took over Chicago operations, proving himself as skilled at management as he was at restoration. The Guarneri's first post-restoration concert was a milestone. Watching it sing under the hands of the Chicago Symphony's first violinist, I felt something shift inside me. Like the instrument, I'd been through fire and emerged transformed. The audience's standing ovation wasn't just for the music. It was for the craftsmanship that made it possible. You know what's wild? Michael said during the after-party. A year ago, you were analyzing evidence of betrayal. Now you're analyzing wood grain for the Mets' new acquisition. He was right. My workbench had become my sanctuary, each restoration a step further from the past. I'd learned to trust my instincts again, both in wood and in life. When a young violinist brought in a supposedly authentic 18th century violin, I spotted the forgery immediately. Funny how experience with deception sharpens your eye for truth. The music world had become my extended family. Concerts, workshops, international restoration projects. I was busier and more fulfilled than ever. Some nights, working late in my workshop, I'd think about Sarah and feel nothing. No anger, no pain, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd made the right call. Barbara joked that I should write a book, From Broken Strings to Strong Boundaries, A Luthier's Guide to Life. Maybe someday. For now, I was content letting my work speak for itself. Each restored instrument was a testament to the power of patience, precision, and the courage to start over. The real breakthrough came when I realized I was happy again. Genuinely, completely happy. Not the surface-level contentment I'd fooled myself with during my marriage, but something deeper. Like a perfectly restored violin, I was making the music I was always meant to make. Looking back on everything from my new workshop in San Francisco, I can't help but appreciate the irony. As a luthier, I've spent my life learning to identify the slightest imperfection in sound or form. Yet somehow, I missed the dissonance in my own marriage until it became impossible to ignore. The morning sun streams through the workshop windows, catching the fresh varnish on a newly restored cello. My team of apprentices will be arriving soon, Teaching the next generation has become an unexpected joy. There's something satisfying about passing on not just the technical skills, but the wisdom that comes from understanding both instruments and people. Robert called yesterday with news from Boston. Sarah and David's dance studio is struggling. Karma playing its own tune, I suppose. The baby, now a toddler, has David's features so clearly that I wonder how I ever doubted my instincts. Sometimes the most obvious notes are the ones we choose not to hear. The Chicago Symphony's conductor stopped by last week to check on his Stradivarius. Over coffee, he asked me what I'd learned from everything that happened. I thought about it while adjusting the violin's bridge. You know how every instrument has its own voice? I said, testing the strings. Well, people do too. The trick is learning to listen for false notes early on. When something sounds off, it usually is. He nodded, understanding immediately. In music, as in life, authenticity isn't just about the big moments. It's in every small detail, every daily choice. My newest project sits on my workbench, a rare German violin from the 1800s. Its previous owner tried covering up serious damage with quick fixes and cheap varnish. Reminds me of how some people try to hide their true nature behind beautiful lies. But like this violin, the truth always surfaces eventually. Michael jokes that I've become some kind of relationship guru in the music community. Musicians now bring me not just their instruments, but their life problems too. You've got a talent for spotting fake notes, he says, whether they're from strings or people. The Guarneri that witnessed my marriages and now tours with a world-famous quartet. Sometimes I catch their performances, watching how this instrument that was once broken now fills concert halls with perfect sound. Like that violin, I've learned that restoration doesn't mean returning to what was. It means becoming something better, stronger, truer. Yesterday, a young violinist asked me how I maintain such high standards in my work. I told her what I've come to believe. Integrity isn't just about the big decisions. It's about all the small choices we make every day. Whether you're crafting instruments or building relationships, there are no shortcuts to quality. Standing in my workshop, surrounded by the tools and instruments that have become my life's work, I feel nothing but gratitude for the journey. Every masterpiece starts with a clear vision and steady hands. The same goes for rebuilding your life. They say every craftsman puts a piece of themselves into their work. These days, what I put into my restorations is wisdom, the kind you can only gain from being broken and finding the strength to rebuild yourself, note by perfect note.